Good afternoon, everybody. Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kate Seeley, Vice President of the Middle East Institute, and I would like to welcome you to today's panel on economics and entrepreneurship in Tunisia. We've got a very special group of speakers assembled here today, and we're going to have a fascinating 75-minute discussion about the challenges and opportunities for startups and businesses in Tunisia, a country which so desperately needs to create more jobs given its soaring unemployment rate. Now, this panel is the outcome of a relationship between MEI and the American Tunisian Association, which is the co-sponsor of today's panel. ATA is comprised of individuals who strongly believe in the importance of strengthening ties between the U.S. And Tunisia, and in promoting greater awareness in the U.S. of this very special country. And of course, we at MEI share those goals, and so we co-host several panels a year with ATA, of which I'm a member, along with many others in this room. And I would encourage everyone here, who I presume loves Tunisia as much as I do, to become a member of the ATA. Go online, and you can join for a mere $50. Now, this panel came about because olive oil maker Karim Fatouri has been visiting the U.S. For a big olive oil association event in New York City. And ATA member Bill Lawrence felt it was critical that Karim Fatouri's story be told here in Washington. And it is a very, very special story. And very briefly, I will tell you just a little bit about him. You're going to hear more on the panel, but he was not an olive oil entrepreneur to begin with. It was an interest he developed later. He developed an expertise, researched and studied this field, and launched a company called Olivco. Am I pronouncing it right, Karim? Olivco, which today has won some of the world's very, very top olive oil awards, including one in China just today. And we are going to be tasting some of that olive oil today after the panel, so stick around. We'll be pouring it in the lobby here. And if you're interested in tasting more, there will be a very special focus tasting tonight in Silver Spring at a restaurant called the All Set Restaurant, beginning at 8:30 p.m., corresponding with the iftar. So if any of you here can make it, please join. Gordon Brown can tell you more about it, or Bill Lawrence. The address is 8630 Fenton Street, and you'll get a chance to taste even more of his oils and really talk to Karim about how he made this happen. Now, in other MEI news, we're co-hosting a conference on the Horn of Africa this Monday, May 20th at the National Press Club. It's entitled Migration, Investment, and Competition, the Middle East and the Horn of Africa. Please go online and check it out if you can join us Monday afternoon. And the following day, Tuesday, May 21st, we're hosting a panel on the Palestinian situation with Brookings scholar Khaled El-Gindi and Noura Erakat of Georgetown University. Now back to the panel. We are delighted that our MEI scholar, Jonathan Weiner, has agreed to moderate today's panel. He has become our North Africa moderator par excellence, so thank you, Jonathan, always for your support of our work on North Africa. Among his many accomplishments, Jonathan has been the U.S. Special Envoy for Libya, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Law Enforcement, and counsel to Senator John Kerry. So thank you, Jonathan. Thanks to Bill Lawrence for making this panel happen. Thanks to the ATA, and many thanks to our amazing panelists today. Jonathan will be introducing them, but Karim, Louise Stoner, and Mohammed Malouche for joining us. So, Jonathan, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Kate. Tunisia is a wonderful place to hang out in. It's a wonderful place, I think, to live in if you've got the economic means to do it. And potentially, it's a wonderful place to build a business in. But its economic growth has been slowed by limits in European demand, by some of its own structural issues, too much government spending, too many barriers to business. I spent time looking at really boring but important assessments by the IMF and World Bank over the last year or two. And they're basically mixed to positive. They said 2.5%, 3% growth in Tunisia, but 30% nearly unemployment among people with graduate degrees, which is actually the highest level of unemployment, is people with graduate degrees, and still too many barriers to doing business, even though they see them coming down. Now here we have three people who are actually working on practical things to build Tunisia's economy in the most pragmatic, concrete, specific ways. So my questions for all of them, and then I'm going to turn to each one separately and introduce them, is what are the things that are going right that you can build on? Where are the opportunities? Where can we get growth going? What are the things that make it hard, that ought to be able to go away? And how do you get past them? Those are the very basic questions. Now, Karim Fattori is actually from a place I've always wanted to go, which is the island of Jerba, which is supposed to be one of the many most glorious places in Tunisia. I was asking him before we met, before we all got together today, so why don't we hear more about Tunisian olive oil? I buy Tunisian olive oil, as it happens, literally all the time. For whatever reason, I have found that it most agrees with my taste and needs. He was telling me that there are many different kinds of olive oil, many different flavors or approaches to olive oil, and different markets like different kinds of olive oil. And he told me that most olive oil is unbranded, Tunisian olive oil, which doesn't make any sense to me. And I want to find out what's wrong with that, if it's an award-winning olive oil, and what we can do about it. Now, Mohamed Balouche has been a key figure in Tunisian American young professionals, which is trying to build sustainable entrepreneurship, education, and export activities, matching startups and entrepreneurs in Tunisia with the diaspora population, working in such areas as healthcare, agriculture, and organic goods. And I want to hear more how that's going and what can happen next in it. And Louise Stoner Crawford is with the Tunisian American Enterprise Fund, which is also looking at where the obstacles are to entrepreneurship and how we can manage challenges to get young Tunisians going in new business, and where the investment opportunities may be on the U.S. side, and how we can leverage these partnerships. So enough of me. I'd like to turn to Karim first to tell us some inspirational stories and how it went in New York, what happened in China, why you're getting those awards, and why Tunisian olive oil isn't branded the way it should be.
The best olive oil.
Go.
I don't know how much time do I have, but if I can tell you 5-6 minutes.
Yeah, let's all start with 5 minutes, or I would say 5 to 7. Go a little
5 to
long, it's
7.
okay.
Okay.
And if you're interested, we'll even go longer.
All right, let's start with how did I go into this olive oil, you know. After the revolution 2011, I was based in London, and I stayed there for about 25 years in London. And after the revolution, it's the country started to grow, started to build, and I come from Jerba, like he said, and they are very well known for businesses, and just like we drink it in the blood, you know, they're always in the blood in the commerce. So I decided to go to China and buy some furniture. I thought if it's in Tunisia, they building, so obviously they need some furniture. So here I am in China, and first time in China. And I saw so many people down there, and they consume a lot, they eat a lot. And in my mind, I start to count money, and I said, you know what, I'm not going to buy from them, I'm going to sell them something. So what can we sell them? Olive oil, dates, something like that. And I knew nothing about olive oil. I mean, literally 5 years ago, it was zero. I knew nothing about it. And so I went back to Tunisia. I picked up some olive oil from the mill. I went down to the duty-free. I picked up some from fancy bottles, you know, and I've made a phone call to my friend, and I said, I want to sell this olive oil in China. Get me some connections. So he put me through to a supermarket. Here I am in front of the supermarket with all this oil. He tasted it, and he liked it. And I said, wow, that's it. I know, it's great. And then he said, where is from? Because he knew I was English, because my friend introduced me as an Englishman. And I said, it's from Tunisia. Here I am, so proud, you know. And he said, Tunisia? Ooh, I don't buy from Tunisia. And I said, well, why that? And he said, well, I bought before, and it wasn't the same, and this and that. And I said, okay, thank you very much. There were 13 hours of agony down there, and that's when I started to focus. I spent 3 years studying Tunisia, olive oil, who controlled, everything to do with olive oil. And then I came here to New York, and I studied my olive oil sommelier course. I done level 1, level 2, level 3. And then I went back to Tunisia, and then entered the olive oil. And today I have 25 medals from all over the world. 3 of them are very interesting. One of them in Los Angeles here in USA, best of show. So basically best of show, it means out of all the oils I enter, they pick up just one, and it happened to be mine. And then and then in London, I got the world's most healthiest olive oil. And then in New York, a few days ago, I got the best in class. This is like the World Cup kind of, the most important competition in the world is here in New York. So we have 907 entries, and all the big companies, 26 countries, all the big companies from the world, they want to enter this. This is like kind of like the highlight. And in the delicate category, I picked up the best oil out of the whole competition. But what's interesting, it's the varieties I picked up, I choose. I select different varieties. When I say different variety, it means every single olive are different. All the trees are different. It's just like human. It really is just like human. They look the same, but they are not the same. You know? And then sometimes, to make it easy how you understand what's the difference between Italian olive oil, Tunisian olive oil, Spanish olive oil, it's all the same, all like a human, for example, all like olives, and they might look the same, but they will speak different language, okay? They may behave differently, but they're all the same. And this Tunisian variety, it's actually down south of Tunisia. This tree, it can resist 4 years, 5 years with no water, and it will bring back again to life. It's a very robust tree. Normally it comes out, all this oil from the south, it comes out as what we call lampanti oil, like not good oil. It goes out in bulk with no name, with nothing, okay? So it's just no value into it. And now, you got the best of class in New York. So it's basically the champagne. So they have like a champagne down there, but they sell it as an asti or as a bubbly wine, fruit juice. And this is where I come to. So I created this company just to improve and to the image in the olive oil in Tunisia all around the world. So Tunisia is the second producer in the world after Spain, and we are the first producer in organic, but the world don't know about that. And we have 99.9% of the world don't understand olive oil, and when you don't understand olive oil, you seem to go for a sweet olive oil, exactly the one I won the medal with in New York this year. So basically, and this is it contributes 70% of the Tunisian production. So you have something amazing where the world want, but they don't know about. So lack of communication. We're not good at. Maybe we're not good at that. But definitely the oil is exceptional. Exceptional.
Well, that's a good start. I want to hear more about what you're going to do about the fact that people still don't know much about olive oil or about Tunisian olive oil.
Yeah.
It is the branding that I look for because it's sweet and clear and clean.
In 2017, when I'm back into Tunisia, the whole country got 11 medals, including mine, 1. So 10 plus mine is 10. Went back down there, educate some people, caused a little bit of, I communicated my medal, and that caused a little bit of a competition in some cases and teaching in some cases. And then that last year, we got about 78 medals. So all of a sudden from 11 to 78, and this year it's over 100 already, and we still counting. So this is the way I see it, the way we can go tell the world that we do have a great olive oil. And this is maybe, it's an individual kind of like.
Well, let's see some fancy chefs in well-known restaurants say we only use Tunisian olive oil and offer it up as an incentive.
Yeah, well, the variety in Tunisia, it helps them. I do pairing as well. I'm like a master pairing, so I blend oil, what we call marriage oil between one to another, and I do pairing. So if you give me like an apple, you tell me which oil will go with it, I will find you the varieties. So for example, in here, the cuisine in America, we have this variety from the south, exactly what I actually got this medal with. It will enhance the flavor of the food you actually have, but you would not change the flavor of the actual thing. So we do have some varieties special for kitchens, and then obviously for finishing. And like for example, the one I won the world most healthiest olive oil in London, it contains about 950 ppm in polyphenol. So we know that is antioxidant and anti-cancer, etc. But it's very bitter. So when it's bitter, it goes very well with a steak, for example, a nice char-grilled steak, and then the sweet oil will go very well with fish. So you need to know which oil you need to use for which food. So most people come and think, I get asked, oh, what is your favorite? You know, it's like asking me what is your favorite out of all these people. I like them all, but I will use maybe William for something different, and I will use. It's exactly like that. Yeah.
So Louise, you are in a organization which has to like them all.
Yes.
And which of all the ones you like are you thinking about these days? Where do you see Tunisian exports and business activity potentially going? Where's the opportunity? Where's the what's exciting? Where's the growth?
Okay, so many questions. I think what I want to do first is just a little brief couple sentences in
About
terms
what
of
you
who
do.
we are and what
Please.
we do, and then tell you a little story about one of our companies, not our favorite, but one of our favorites, because we have many favorites. And then a little bit about what we've learned. So I'm with the Tunisian American Enterprise Fund. We're a $100 million US government-funded private, we act like a private equity fund in Tunisia. And our purpose is to invest in small and medium enterprises in Tunisia. We do that, we support entrepreneurs and businesses across the spectrum. We do through very small businesses, through supporting microfinance institutions, we do startups, we do high growth companies, and we do a couple of the larger SMEs. And we provide our financing in a lot of ways. And one of the ways we do that is we adapt what works really well in terms of financial innovations in other parts of the world and take it to Tunisia and adapt it to the Tunisian context. So we're looking to find ways to meet the financial needs for growth of small businesses in Tunisia. So we have this wonderful opportunity to learn about lots and lots of different kinds of businesses. And we do invest in an olive oil company, and we've looked at several others. The story I want to tell you today, really shortly, is one of the ways we invest is we're an anchor investor in something called Flat 6 Labs Tunis. And some of you may be familiar with their model. They're a startup accelerator with an affiliated seed fund that acts like a venture capital fund. And they have Flat 6 Lab Cairo, they have one in Amman, they have them in several other places. And we help bring them to Tunis. And they fund cycles of startup companies. And so it's where you see a lot of variety. The companies we focus on in Tunisia tend to be the IT and technology companies. One of these companies is called Dabshi. And Dabshi is a platform for selling pre-loved clothes. So they came to Flat 6 Labs. So they were a startup, they were under 8 years old, women-led. They were looking for help thinking through their growth plans for attracting new investors. They went through the entire accelerator program, and they gained high visibility. They have attracted other investors. They're now active in Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. They're looking at expanding throughout the MENA region, and I think that's one of the opportunities that companies in Tunisia have. Several of the companies we're looking at are looking to Sub-Saharan Africa and the MENA region for growth, as well as to Europe. And external investors, they brought in other external investors and are entering into strategic partnerships in Tunisia and elsewhere. And so it's a really wonderful story. One of the things I like about that story is there's this thing called Demo Day that they do where all the companies that have gone through the cycles stand up and do their presentations, sort of like Shark Tank, except there's no one shooting them down, to a room full of investors. And we have our board. Mohamed Malouche is one of my board members. So our board includes Americans and Tunisians, which is one of the wonderful things about this company is we're all together. And several of our American board members were like, that is a ridiculous company. We do not need a fashion marketplace for pre-loved clothing. And our Tunisian board members, including our fabulous Tunisian COO, Hela Farati, It's like, no, that is absolutely fantastic and just what we need. And I say that because there's a lot of knowledge in Tunisia about what's going to work. And our American board members bring a lot of value, but they don't know everything. So what is TAF's role in that? Well, we helped identify the model. We helped anchor the investment. We provide a lot of ongoing support and expertise and management in Flat 6 Labs as it grows. That's just one of our investment vehicles and one little story of one small company, but just to give you a taste, I'm happy to talk about some of the rest. But I was sort of thinking about what it is we've learned, and there are not a lot of surprises. I mean, we've learned it's really tough to be an entrepreneur in Tunisia. Our esteem for Tunisian entrepreneurs has just grown by leaps and bounds. You know, they're innovative, they're smart, they're tenacious, lots of persistence, lots of perseverance. Entrepreneurs come in all sizes, shapes, ages. We do not fund just young people. We are very interested and do have some special projects in reaching out to youth and students, but our entrepreneurs are all sorts of ages. They're in lots of industries. They're in olive oil, they're in tech, they're in handicraft, they're in machinery, they're in healthcare, they're in education, they're in unsexy businesses, and some sexy businesses like olive oil. So, and we look for investments throughout the country. One of the things we work really hard at is not just being in Tunis, working down the coast, some in the interior. There's some more challenges to getting into other places, but we really try to do that. And let me see, any other big lessons? To work closely with the entrepreneurs like we do, it's really rolling up your sleeves on the ground. Can't do it from here. We have a team of Tunisians led by Hela, really talented people, but it really is a day in, day out working. It's not something that we're able to do from a distance, and it takes a lot of work to adapt things to the Tunisian context. And I think that's our strength, that we've done that and we've made that investment.
The IMF says that Tunisia doesn't have enough capital at home, and I'm wondering how much of a difference your lending makes in what kinds of sectors. And is it the microloans? Is it the small loans? Is it equity investments? Where's the thing where you see the most bang for the buck in light of the lack of liquidity at home?
I would say D, all the above. And $100 million, which is what we have, which is significant, is not enough. So what we're hoping to do is, as we have our track record and as we're building it, we will be going out and trying to raise some money alongside to help grow. But there is not lots of foreign investment. When we do see growth in a lot of the companies we invest are able to, there's a story about one company that nobody wanted to fund them, and we went in and funded them, and they got capital, and they got working capital, and they had great growth, and then all the local banks came in, and they took us out. So that's a success story. So there is, but there definitely is room for more equity and more loans.
Well, is there room for more American diaspora? And what can we be doing from here to help strengthen this bilateral economic relationship as well as cultural relationship? Mohammed?
Sure. Well, let me address that.
Tell us a little about your organization, yourself, and then
Sure. I want to perhaps, I guess, piggyback on some of the comments that were made by both Karim and Louise. These are testimonies of success stories, and in many ways reflective of what's happening today in Tunisia. You have the ingredients of success. You have the right crops, the right olive oil in Tunisia, but we didn't find yet a way to industrialize it, to showcase it, to make it bigger, and to sort of create economic growth for the entire country. And I want to sort of comment, perhaps, because I see that the audience here is made up of many experts of Tunisia. So I'm going to venture and try to take the risk of, maybe commenting on some of the opportunities and the challenges for economic growth and for entrepreneurial growth, most importantly in Tunisia. I always tend to spin the story more optimistically because I want to also, give hope and give a bit of optimism, but I'll try to be realistic as well. Tunisia does have the ingredients to succeed. I think we all know them. You know, it's a country that's educated, that has a good infrastructure, a relatively good infrastructure. It's a country that, you know, offers good skills for a relatively low cost, very good engineers. It's a country also that has witnessed a revolution and theoretically is going in a path where things are slowly but surely becoming more transparent because there's watchdog organizations everywhere, because there's a need for transparency by the population. And it's a country where women are vibrant and are playing an important role in economic development. So the assets are there, the fundamentals are there. Now, the recipe, the chef, the whole right combination has not been found. And in fact, things have gotten worse since the revolution. You know, Tunisia was ranked number 40 in the Doing Business indicators in 2010. It is now ranked last year it was number 88, now it's number 80. In fact, this year marked a significant year because it's the first year where Tunisia gained 8 points, essentially sort of curbing that spiral down and sort of getting up a little bit. The major challenges, I think, for entrepreneurs, I think Louise, you know, through her work has identified many of those, but it's access to everything, access to finance, access to information, access to proper mentorship, access to markets, access to everything. And what makes it harder is that, you know, the Tunisian system, even though the head was technically cut, the system sort of remains. You know, the bureaucracy is heavy. Tunisia has an administration of control, not an administration of services. It's an over-regulated country. You know, there's the debate has been for 7 years about sort of the choc de la simplification, the simplification sort of shock. But you know, every time there's a new idea in Tunisia, it seems like out of that idea, you don't create a business, you create a law. And these laws are essentially made so that they tell you what you're actually able to do, as opposed to they tell you what you're actually not able to do. And the rest, you know, you're able to do. So it's very, very structured. But I think that the biggest impediment is not the bureaucracy, is not the access to. The biggest impediment to, I think, entrepreneurs, to investors, to economic growth in general, have to do with the absence of visibility, the absence of direction, the absence of a roadmap, both on the economic and the political fronts. On the economic, because despite the efforts that were made during the past 7 years, and there has been efforts, in terms of regulation, in terms of a new code of investment. 3 weeks ago, there's a very important law that passed in Tunisia, which is called loi transversale, so like cross-cutting law, which basically takes articles from various pieces of legislations and addresses the bottlenecks in these pieces of legislation. So there's been progress made in Tunisia, but the problem is that there hasn't been a vision that was laid out about sort of what is it that we want to be when we grow up? What is it that we're going to focus our energy, our attention, our investment in? Are we going to focus on, you know, growing our agriculture with innovation? Are we going to be a digitally enabled economy? Are we going to focus on the green economy? Are we going to take tourism and marry it with health and become the premier destination of health tourism in the Mediterranean? There hasn't been sort of something that was outlined as a key priority, that around that priority you sort of build all your investment, your incentives, and you sort of develop the machine around it. We've been trying to be everything to everyone and try to be successful, and we can't. We have been unsuccessful on everything. That's the economic front. The political front, There are elections at the end of this year. There's been elections 5 years ago. There's been municipal elections 2 years ago. Seems like we spend a lot of time in election, but not focusing on the right thing, which is out of the revolution, economic opportunity and dignity. The political arrangements that happened in Tunisia earned Tunisia a Nobel Peace Prize. It's great to be known as a consensus, a compromise country, but that a consensus and compromise has not translated into sort of an economic arrangement. And in fact, the economic arrangement is impossible. The economic compromise is impossible, because in economy, there's virtually decisions that need to be made, and there will be losers and winners, and the losers are going to be very vocal, and they're going to go to the street, and they're going to protest. And so there hasn't been, that absence of sort of visibility, that absence of vision, I think has been, handicapping. Now, I'll finish with the good news, I think, and this sort of gets us back to the entrepreneurial ecosystem. If there's one thing that me personally, spending a lot of time in Tunisia these days, I'm thrilled about. Every time I feel like, things are not going right in the country, I immerse myself in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's a vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem in Tunisia in all the stages, from inspiration to ideation to incubation to acceleration to growth. There are actors that have grown organically and have formed this ecosystem with donor supports, with also a lot of energy, because out of the revolution, people wanted to venture. At the end of the day, Mohamed Bouazizi, who ignited the revolution, was himself an informal entrepreneur. And so there was a lot of energy around, wanting to sort of create your own business. And this entrepreneurial ecosystem did something that's fabulous. They essentially created their own law. The Startup Act is a legislation that came directly from the entrepreneurial ecosystem. It was not led by the government. It was ignited by the government. In fact, the government came a little bit late to this whole entire entrepreneurial thing. They just didn't see it. They didn't believe it. Now they're getting into it. But this whole Startup Act is something that perhaps we will have an opportunity to talk about. But in a nutshell, it's been created by the ecosystem. It provides the ability to startups with a certain level of innovation to benefit from certain fiscal advantages, some other advantages. It essentially removes a lot of the barriers that one would hope that Tunisia would remove once and for all for every segment of the industry in Tunisia. But it does it for a specific segment, which is an innovative segment, a segment that is creating added value. And it's doing it through the help of the ecosystem, and it's doing it because the Tunisian government and the Tunisian ecosystem realize that once a startup reaches a certain level of maturity, they flee, they leave. They leave outside of Tunisia, and as a consequence, the Startup Act was created to contain that massive migration of talents and to also produce a unicorn, hopefully by 2023, that can show, because entrepreneurship is not a panacea, it doesn't solve all the problem. In fact, it creates little employment in Tunisia today. But what it creates is that it creates hope. And it gives a sense to young entrepreneurs and young Tunisians that success is possible without unfair advantages, and that there could be inspired by stories like Karim's, the stories that Louise talked about in Flat 6, and there's many other stories I can tell you about of successful Tunisian who have raised money. Very recently, InstaDeep has raised $7 million. It's a company that essentially at the leading edge of artificial intelligence. You have Cognera, you have Mass Analytics, who are leaders in the region for analytics. You have Travelcar, who's sort of the Uber of rental cars in airports throughout the world. All of these are Tunisian companies that raised millions of dollars, but that have succeeded by going outside of Tunisia. And the idea is to keep them inside.
You just raised a lot of provocative issues. One that I heard clearly is brain drain and capital drain, people leaving when they're successful. which is kind of shocking to me, because next to Tunisia is Libya, and they're not fleeing to Libya. And next to Tunisia is Algeria, and they're not going to Algeria to do the startups. So what I'm hearing probably is that they're leaving North Africa entirely, which is kind of shocking. But you also listed a whole bunch of sectors where there's potential activity. And I'm looking where the government's supporting activity. I mean, you talked about agriculture, you talked about tech, you talked about education, you talked about healthcare, all of these different areas. It would seem to me that Tunisia ought to be able to be a hub for the entire Mediterranean. It ought to be one of those places that's generating activity for the whole Mediterranean. And I'm going to ask you a question, and this is a different way. Okay, you've got a magic wand. It's your magic wand. You get 1 to 3 wishes. It doesn't really matter how many there are, not more than 3, on what you could change that would address the reason why people are leaving and get them to come and stay and do more. And I'm going to give you, you've got a magic wand as well. It doesn't have to be limited to oil, though I'm happy to hear about oil. And you've got one with your startup capital and your partnerships. And I want each of you to use that magic wand to make the next things happen, regardless of what anybody else wants. Who wants to use their wand first? Anyone ready for one magic wish?
I think, yeah, well,
Go.
I mean,
Yeah.
you want to go ahead? Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned a couple of things that, the notion of hub, that's something that we fantasized about in Tunisia a lot, We
It's been
proclaim,
frustrating.
we
It's been
proclaim that
frustrating.
we are the hub, and we have the possibility, we have the ingredients again to be the hub. The problem is that our neighbors also say they're the hub. The Egyptians, the Turkish, everybody says they're the hub. So how do you characterize the hub? How do you differentiate yourself? What needs to happen, in my opinion, in Tunisia is a few things. Number one, and these are easy things for me to say, but you'll help me out, I guess, with the how. Tunisia is notoriously known for drafting the best laws, I think, but poorly implementing them, and that's the fear as well for the Startup Act. The Startup Act theoretically is a wonderful law, but then it's a law that asks a number of administration within Tunisia to relinquish a number of the authorization, a number of, and sort of do things a lot more smoothly. To me, the first thing is simplification, simplification, simplification. Things are too convoluted. I think Secretary Pritzker, when she came in Tunisia in 2015, she described it as a Byzantine maze, the regulation in Tunisia and the procedures. And simplify, 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 automate, automate, automate. Now, it's easy for me to say this because I've witnessed it when I lived in the US, I witnessed it when I lived in France, but the reality of things is that, we all have to acknowledge the fact that there's, change management, political economy analysis that needs to go into the simplification, process, and the automation process. It's not as easy as that. You have to convince people. You have to build coalition of the willing. You have to, understand what's driving the people. What is it that matters to them? Why is it that they are not wanting to do X, Y, or Z? So it's something that requires a lot of, patience and a lot of timing. And Tunisia today is not an environment where something can come from above like it was a few years ago and it gets executed. That's no longer the case. There are now, the political economy has changed. The state is weaker, the unions are stronger, the lobbies are stronger. You have to sort of factor in all of this to make sure that, your simplification process is successful. The second thing, and I would start also, this one is really important, and I think there are efforts into making this, is to reform the administration. Today, the administration has 600,000 people for 11 million people. Just by comparison, in Morocco, there's 400,000 people for 36 million people. 600,000 people, there's been an addition in 2011, 2012 of about 200,000 people, which has decreased the productivity of the administration, of the deep state, instead of increasing it. You have public companies today, 204 of them, who are spending about 7.5 billion dinars, but who are generating only 1.5 billion dinars. These situations are not sustainable. And I think it all starts with the system of the administration. The administration produces very talented civil servants. It does. But I think there are too many of them. There needs to be a higher they call it la haute fonction publique, which is sort of the high public functions, which is there, to essentially drive excellence, in my opinion. You need locomotives within the administration to change the system. The system is locked. If you don't have those locomotives, and if you don't provide people better pay and a mandate to do the reforms, and if those reforms don't come from within, from the administration, it's not going to be successful and not sustainable. And so so it needs to come from within. And in order for it to come from within, there needs to be a creation of essentially a top tier. All the neighboring countries have done it. Tunisia has not done it. And those needs to be paid better, needs to be responsible, have more responsibilities, and eventually take the decision and be the locomotive for the change of the country.
So some top-down reform, some vision, and some simplification.
And some bottom-up coming from
action.
ecosystem,
Yeah,
like entrepreneurs.
Okay. Karim, do your magic.
Well, he already done the magic, so it's pretty good. But I will add just really, I will write down a program how to educate people, but from the beginning. So 15 years later, 20 years later, I have complete new young generation with the same standard as we have here, for example, in USA or in Europe. So a complete program from start to finish. This is my magic stick. But as a country, really, the way it's been positioned is excellent. First of all, it's African, so it trades with other Africans. It's an Arab, trades with other Arabs. It's a Muslim country, and it's a peaceful country, so we trade with Europe too. And we have very good relation with the USA, with Canada, with many different countries. So it's a very good position. And if it was good enough for the Roman, it's good enough for us. It was the second Roman Empire. So I just use one stick, and I think in 20 years' time from now, we will have a very good...
Massive educational reform.
But from the beginning, from that little kid from brushing his teeth, like from the beginning.
We've got these graduates who don't have jobs today. So education's clearly part of it, but it's the right education for what's going to drive things next. I don't know the answer to that. I'm interested in how Louise is going to use her wand.
Well, I'm very lucky because I go after all this. And the thing I was thinking about was dealing with where we are now in terms of the education and the young people. Because I love the idea of the education reform that Karim was talking about. But we have just done a small pilot program, which is just beginning to give like a glimmer of some ideas of what else is possible. We went out, we took some of our companies with real problems, and we took them to Kasserine, to University Yaoundé, not in the metropolitan major areas, where the students don't get that many opportunities. And we asked them to put together teams. And we had 34 teams apply, 11 were selected, to spend 24 hours at a hackathon overnight, locked in, working on these real problems of real companies. And after the 24 hours, they presented them. They had worked on their presentation skills, they worked on marketing, they worked on their financial analysis, just little little segments that were interspersed in. And these students were so excited at being allowed to solve real-life problems, at having the entrepreneurs there, at being exposed to things that they just weren't exposed to at their university. And it's one tiny pilot program that we did because we're trying to find ways to stimulate the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And, you know, so we have the reform that Mohammed was talking about. We have the new education system that Kareem was talking about. But I'm eager to find ways to provide opportunities and open the eyes and make the world bigger for the people who are there now so that they can come back with ideas and bring them to their towns. And we would love to fund them as they move forward. But it was a really exciting project. And there's a great hunger among the young people who are out there now.
One of the things I keep looking for in Tunisia specifically and in North Africa generally is what is going to be the locomotive? What is going to be the dynamo that brings change, that really drives things forward? With the breakdown of authoritarian governments that drove things for a long time and the replacement of a more democratic and diffuse approach, one of the things that's been lost in the process is anybody's ability to drive things forward very, very rapidly. You don't have the national consensus in any of these countries. You could say maybe in Egypt in a certain way now. And I want to talk about Egypt just for a second because it's interesting. Egypt under El-Sisi inherited all kinds of problems. He probably has created some additional problems. But he did ultimately do a whole package of economic reforms, which were very, very hard, involved the revaluation of the Egyptian currency, among other things, and which actually made a real difference in economic growth. It didn't get money out to the small and medium-sized enterprises. The country's still too Cairo-specific. It's still got too much military dominance. But because he was in charge, he was able to accept and implement a package of reforms. And one of the problems that Tunisia does have is it keeps having elections. It keeps having a cacophony of different people with different ideas about the future in different sectors. Now, the good news about that is you can potentially have, instead of one thing you're dependent on, like Libya or Algeria and oil, you have a bunch of things that are providing growth at small and medium levels, 2%, 3%, 4% a year. It's not enough, but it's steady, and if one doesn't go, something else goes, and that's a positive. So maybe for the next 5 or 10 years, it'll be every flavor of olive oil as Tunisia becomes the best branded olive oil on the planet and the preference of all restaurants everywhere if they know what they're doing other than Greek restaurants and the occasional Italian one. I hope that happens. I want that to happen. And
I can add to this.
Please, go.
Once you bring Tunisian olive oil at the table, you want to go and visit Tunisia. And then over there, you might be able to see what you don't see in here. So you might be able to invest. There's a lot of, I call Tunisia as like a well full of gold. It depends how big your bucket is. It really is. It's just like that. There's so many opportunities and so many things you can do down there. And I think it's kind of like, if you talk about US, Tunisia, I think it's like really like a hidden, it's like Aladdin cave. I mean, we're talking about medical extract for medical reasons. There's a lot of different things over there. There's a lot of things.
Well, tourism is coming back. It's interesting. Both the World Bank and the IMF have noted the resurgence of this industry. So the Tunisia as a brand, which got hurt by the beach Susi episode and the Bardo episode, has come back. But the question of how you get greater Tunisia consciousness is an interesting one. A firm I work with recently did a campaign called Wunderbar Together for Germany. And Germany said, we're not going to focus on the US government. We're going to do different types of cultural and business exchanges and build consciousness of the overall US-German relationship. We're going to do it in as many different ways as we can. So you get a lot of people thinking about Germany and the United States and thinking about the United States and Germany. It was called Wunderbar Together. I hated the name, but it worked very, very well. It was quite successful. And the question of how we could get greater Tunisian brand awareness is a really interesting one for me, and of course that's what you're doing every day. Now we've teed this up with a pretty broad, interesting initial discussion. What I would love to have is observations and questions from the many experts in this room who aren't sitting up at this table. We've got a microphone at the back which can move around based on whose hand gets raised, and I hope there'll be hands raised. You should ask a question to anybody except me, because I'm not the expert, I'm just the moderator, and I want you to talk to the experts.
I would say it's wrong.
I'm Ahmed Ahmed with the Minaret of Freedom Institute. My question is for Kareem. You talked about the obstacles you had to face in terms of learning about olive oil and things like that. I'm interested in knowing how you got around the barriers, legal and bureaucratic. Is it something you can talk about? And if so, let us know what were the most difficult things to deal with and how you dealt with them.
In creating the company, you mean?
Creating the company in Tunisia.
Yeah. It's the paperwork. You need a lot of paperwork, so you can spend 2-3 months just going around from one to another to get it. But today I've got a full company with a full paperwork. But it's true, it takes a long time. It's not like when I was in England, I can go online, I can open up a company, I can start a trade. It's nothing like that in Tunisia. But once you're in, you're in. And yeah, it's not easy, but it's not impossible either.
All right. I hope it was you. Thank you. You talked a lot about this new ecosystem that's being created for small businesses and entrepreneurs and so on, and I think that's very good. But one thing that is certainly missing in Tunisia is also an ecosystem for larger investments. I was very struck, I think it was a couple of years ago, I happened to be in Tunis. At the time there was a meeting of the Chamber of Commerce, and one of the things, on investment. And one of the things they did in that, during that meeting was to honor investors in Tunisia. None of them, none of the honorees had invested a penny after 2011. So that essentially, that is a big hole, essentially, in that country's development. I don't deny the importance of small and medium-sized enterprises, but there is another side. And Morocco has been extremely successful in creating an ecosystem for the car industry and, and some other things. Are there any efforts that you see beginning in Tunisia to develop that kind of ecosystem?
Do you want me to answer?
Yes, go, please.
Go ahead. Let me sort of, perhaps, Louise, afterwards you can talk about, as an investor yourself, but attracting investment in Tunisia has been something that I've been working on and struggling with for the past 8 years. We in Tunisia have done it 2 ways. We've tried to attract investment 2 ways. The first way is by organizing big conferences. We all know that big conferences are good, you feel good when you have a big conference, you're talking about laws, etc. But you usually don't attract the right people. You attract people who are brilliant, write about it, perhaps visit the country, but you're not attracting the right. The second way we've done it is by organizing trade shows. So we send a delegation from Tunisia to, for example, here, the US Chamber of Commerce. And what happens is that the US Chamber of Commerce sends an email to all of its members, and whoever shows up, shows up. Again, you're in a situation where you don't have targeted investment. There's a third way, a number of other ways, and all require 2 to 3 things that I think have not been mastered thus far. The first thing is preparation. The second thing is follow-up. The organization that I chair has organized a tour of site locators in Tunisia. What are site locators? Site locators are people who, for a living, look for sites for investors. They represent investors. So they're headhunters of sites. Thus far, we've always promoted Tunisia in its macroeconomic sort of value proposition. It has an educated population, blah, blah, blah. We've never sort of focused down on what is it that Tunisia offers in terms of industrial zones, in terms of technoparks, in terms of very specific. And what are the characteristics of these technoparks? How many graduates? How many clinics, hospitals? How many roads? How far is it from the key airports? You know, is there a good standard of living there? And the effort that needs to be made is to focus on the number of sites in Tunisia, because investors are there to make money. They're there to not for the value proposition of the country, the macroeconomic value proposition of the country is the icing on the cake. It's not the first thing that investors look at. First thing is the location, and what is the value proposition of the site? You know, how much money are they going to make into these sites? So bringing very targeted site locators to Tunisia and not showing them Sidi Bou Said or Carthage, although they're beautiful places, but showing them industrial zones and technoparks with aeronautics and sort of cutting-edge information technology, you know, scientists, that's what's going to attract investors. And now, so the funny story is that we've been doing this in Tunisia in the past. We've done it in 2008 once, where we invited site locators. It's very hard to get them because a lot of people ask for them. When they come, they want everything to be ready, meaning that there's a humongous amount of preparation that needs to be made. Data. This data today is nowhere to be found in Tunisia because some of it is at the national level, some of it is at the regional level, some of it is at the local level. It needs to be aggregated. After that data, after they come, they actually, you know, anybody who came to Tunisia, I think the first thing that surprises them is that, oh, well, yeah, it's pretty sophisticated. It's actually more sophisticated than I thought. That's the first reaction that I get, at least from people who first time they come to Tunisia. The second ingredient, and I'll stop there, is after they leave, you got to follow up with them. And for us, it's been a systematic issue. Whether it's conferences or trade shows or site locators visit, we just don't follow up. We don't have the discipline, and that's the hard part. So now we've created agencies. We have the Tunisia Investment Authority. We have the Foreign Investment Promotion Agency. Lots of agency, but the important thing is that they need to have, and again, going back to attracting people in the civil service who come from the private sector and potentially can add value and have perhaps, you know, the rigor and the discipline to work with, you know, people who are coming more from traditional civil service backgrounds to work on sort of communicating together and working on sort of that discipline that is required to attract investment.
That's interesting. For some reason, you had me starting to think about Singapore.
That's how they did it?
That's how they did it, but they had an authoritarian leader acting as the engine and driving it. I want to turn to Louise, and then you, and then you.
So what I like about the way Mohammed was talking about it is he hit on a bunch of the things that I think investors look for. And they look for rule of law. Tunisia has that. Your property, your rights as an investor are protected. I mean, that's a really critical feature to have as an investor going in. You need the enabling environment. There's been some discussion here today about how that can be a little difficult. Sometimes it takes longer and there's a little more bureaucracy, but improvements can be made there. You need infrastructure. Mohammed was talking about the technology zones. Some of our small business investments actually are in some of these zones. So I think Tunisia has some of the ingredients, and you need some track record. And I mean, we're building it on the SME area, but Tunisia is a country that has lots of the elements. It's not quite there, but it has lots of the elements.
Hi, thank you, Jonathan. My name's John Heffern, retired American diplomat, now at Georgetown. I've got one question and one introduction. Very brief, I promise. Mohammed, you've talked about conferences. My question is, in 2011, I understand now that the State Department hosted a big conference, the Tunisia Partnership Forum. And I wondered, how did that go? Was that useful? And the reason I'm asking is tomorrow, we're hosting the Ethiopian Partnership Forum. And I think what we did is we super replaced the word Tunisia and added the word Ethiopia on all the documents to prepare for this conference tomorrow. So question is, I'm going to that conference. Did this have any impact, and did it help you, and did it help Indonesia, this partnership forum in 2011, or has there been a lack of follow-up to follow your question? My introduction will be very brief. Entrepreneur is here today from the Halcyon Incubator Group. Ranit Avni is there. Please stand up, Ranit. She's trying to help with the brain drain and the job creation. She's got a group called Localize that is linking college students to jobs. She's very successful in Jordan, and now she's trying to do the same in Tunisia. So please talk to her after the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the State Department conference that was organized in November 2011, I think had a lot of good intention and a lot of also good impact, because it enabled, I think, two parties that didn't know each other. The Tunisian private sector, the US private sector, convened by the State Department to start understanding what are some of the mechanisms of partnerships that exist. And I think it was very useful because at that point in time, it was somewhat of a discovery on both sides. You know, there hasn't been a tradition of sort of heavy investments between the two countries. So it was very useful in the sense that it was educational. It was helpful to understand the various mechanisms of co-financing that OPIC, I think OPIC has been renamed now, right? Offered. It was interesting to see, the type of support that the U.S. government could provide to the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Tunisia, which I think out of that conference came a lot of ideas around how to efficiently put together, mentorship programs and, incubation programs, etc. So a lot of it was good in terms of sort of a roadmap of initiatives that could start this cooperation. Then the relationship evolved, and in 2015 there was sort of more talks of that sort, a joint economic commission that was organized, I believe, in 2016. David Mehdi, and then another one that's going to be organized here in a couple of months, that are sort of the mechanism, the vehicle to increase that level of cooperation. As I said, the State Department plays the great role of convener, of bringing the right people together, but then it's up to the private sector to frankly develop the mechanism to foster that cooperation and do that follow-up and continue the momentum.
Hi, everyone. I was asked to share my story. So my name is Hela. I'm originally from Tunisia, but my parents immigrated in the U.S. in 1980. And so most of my teenage life, and I did my own undergraduate and my graduate school here in the U.S., but then went back to Tunisia in 2000. And spent there 13 years, and towards the end of around after the 10th year, I decided to do I wanted to have my own business, but something that would have a tie between Tunisia and the US. And so I thought about olive oil, because my grandfather made olive oil. So I started doing all my research and it does take a lot of know-how in terms of olive oil. It's not that simple. So it took me a little while as well, but I was thinking of doing it from Tunisia, but then things happened and something happened in my life that I had to come back to the States. I was very happy to come back. So what I did is kind of created the company here in the US, and now, and then do the olive oil. Instead of exporting it from Tunisia to the US, now I'm importing it from Tunisia to here. And so it's been a great, beautiful, beautiful journey. We do have a wonderful, wonderful product. It just demands a lot of persistence, a lot of endurance, just changing the image, just talking about everything, all the assets that we have in Tunisia is just a lot of, you have to be, you have to be passionate about it. I created the company here. I started selling olive oil in 2014 with 2 pallets, and today, after 4 years now, I'm bringing in 2 containers of olive oil. So it is completely doable, and the restaurants do come with you, and they do. I mean, if you show them the product, you show them what it tastes like, how it's made, how we have all these great assets on how we're so different from Spain and Italy. I mean, Spain has great olive oil. Italy has great olive oil, but Tunisia has wonderful olive oil. I mean, it's the best of the best. And even the Japanese did a study to show that our olives are 10 times richer in antioxidants than the olives found in Spain or Italy. So we do have great assets. And we just need to do the great marketing in terms of what we have. I mean, it's just in terms of even our tourism. I always say, I mean, we need leaders who actually can do the marketing for our country. I mean, we see the Minister of Tourism. He's done such a great job in terms of marketing Tunisia that now Jerba is full. Or even to go spend New Year's in Tunisia, all the hotels are full. I mean, I tried, it's completely full. So it's a lot of marketing, but it's just Tunisia is little. Not too many people know about it. I mean, you do because you've been exposed to it, but we need more people like you also to talk about Tunisia and all its assets. I'm here to do that too. Karim is here, and this great panel is here. Mohammed is wonderful in doing that, and just so I just wanted to share that in terms of it's completely possible. I'm thrilled. I'd love to be able to bring a container a month, and I think it's possible. Mm-hmm. It's completely possible just because of the quality of the olive oil that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Hella. And if Jonathan will give you 30 seconds. Hella is the co-host tonight of the tasting we're doing that Kate talked about at All Set Restaurant in Silver Spring. After we break here, we're going to have some of the gold-winning oil for a little bit of a taste out here, and then the one that won best in class we'll have only tonight. So you have to come tonight to get this #1 in the world olive oil. So I'll hand the microphone back to you.
So we have a few more comments, questions in back. I'm happy to go either direction with a comment or a question. More magic wand ideas. Questions for our knowledgeable guests, panelists.
Hi, my name is Dina Sharif. I'm from Egypt, actually, so I'm very fascinated with learning a little bit more about the entrepreneurship ecosystem. I have an organization that does a lot of work to promote social entrepreneurship and that convergence between development and how that can be led through entrepreneurship. So I have two questions. I would love to hear more about what is happening in Tunisia with regards to how entrepreneurship can solve some of the biggest problems that Tunisia continues to face in terms of sustainable development. My other question is, we talk a lot, and we do this in Egypt too, about ecosystems to support entrepreneurship. And when you look at some of the places in the world that we've really seen entrepreneurship bloom, I don't want to talk about Silicon Valley, but there are other cities, you see these ecosystems that have a lot of synergy and collaboration where the different parts are very connected. And I feel that, at least in the case of Egypt, we continue to have an ecosystem, although it's growing, it's very fragmented. And I think that really holds back the full potential of entrepreneurship to be unleashed in countries like ours. I would love to hear specifically, Mohammed, your thoughts on the ecosystem in Tunisia, since you mentioned it, and what is happening either at the policy level or from the players in the ecosystem to really allow for that kind of synergy to happen and that kind of collaboration that is needed to really see that potential unleashed.
Good, and let's have a couple more questions or comments before before our panelists respond, because we're going to be short on time soon.
I'd like to go back to this issue of the vision. Is Tunisia looking to Europe as where its future is in terms of markets and trade, et cetera, or to Africa? And what, if you did have a vision, what do you think this vision should be for Tunisia?
One more.
This is a question for Louise. The most funding for enterprises goes straight to the entrepreneur, but the downside of that is that it's dependent on the capital. But I was just in Tunisia visiting an incubator that teaches the Tunisians to build their businesses on 100 dinar that they bring to the table. And although that's not a very popular model, my question is there potential for those kinds of models, which are not capital dependent, to lead to an explosion of entrepreneurship because the Tunisians learned that they can start things without needing that capital to be invested on a micro scale?
Okay, so 3 topics. How to build an ecosystem. Are the natural partners in Europe and Africa both or something else as drivers? What kinds of things can you build without lots of capital? Start with you, Louise.
Okay. I'm going to let Mohammed take the big picture, entrepreneurship ecosystem part. On terms of where the growth is, I can just tell you anecdotally from many of the companies that we invest in. And some look to Europe, but a bunch of them, like there are several IT companies that we invest in. And one of the things we haven't talked that much about is the huge wealth of IT engineers and people who have great IT expertise in Tunisia. Now, there is some brain drain of them moving because they're so highly sought after, but there are a lot of companies and a lot of possibilities there within the country, and I think it's one of its strengths. Some of the companies we invest in with that do work for Saudi Arabia, do work for Abu Dhabi, do work for other places because they speak in Arabic. There are also some of the companies we're investing in are looking towards the whole MENA region and then also looking south to sub-Saharan Africa. So one of the great things about Tunisia is it's not one uniting vision, but there is a vision for expansion. So it's not one answer. In terms of the small companies, I mean, I think it really takes the whole scale. You know, you start small, you start really small, you get to a bigger level, and then you can go to a microfinance bank. And Tunisia has more microfinance institutions now than they had before the revolution. It's one of the changes that's happened. And so then you can get a small loan, and then you can build it up, and then you can keep going. So there are no silver bullets, but lots of different approaches are needed. And I think that helping people learn how to think like an entrepreneur and try things out, and the whole thing about being an entrepreneur is the magic of it is the perseverance and the iterative nature and the trying and trying and the trying and the resilience. And so it's great to start with small amounts of money and go.
Mohammed? Sure. So I guess let me address some of the questions around the synergies in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I think it's sort of it's a natural evolution. Obviously, we've seen initially in the year 2010, around the revolution, that there were a number of universities, co-working spaces that have started. One of them has a big reputation because it's been ranked actually the 3rd best co-working space in the world by Forbes magazine. It's called Cogit in Tunis. And it's, you feel that there's energy, that people are sort of interacting and talking to each other. But then, you also feel like there's, donors' money that's injected in some of these organizations, and that the entrepreneurs tend to sort of stall to a certain degree because they are not moving in the value chain. They are sort of after business competitions, and they become like machines to win smaller business competition instead of building businesses. In the years 2013, 14, there's an evolution, a natural evolution that has happened where you've seen more incubators. Instead of co-working spaces, you sort of move into the value chain, and you've seen more incubators that have started incubating companies and sort of helping them, sort of evolve their ideas and raise funding, etc. And then same thing in the 2014, 2015, you've seen accelerators. You've seen Flat 6, which is obviously, and then in 2016 we had Endeavor. So it's sort of the whole chain became a little bit more organically sort of, there were gaps, and I think those gaps were filled sort of as you went. Where there has been deficiencies is that and this is also a little bit of sort of, the donors have played an immense role in sustaining, I think, the entrepreneurial ecosystem. But they've done it in ways that are not necessarily geared towards building sort of a unicorn to give hope to all the others, but sort of, you know, they're bound by volume sort of metrics. And so for them, it's more important to train like 4,000 young entrepreneurs in becoming better in their soft skills and their presentation skills, instead of sort of seeing, because when you train 4,000 people, you give hope to 4,000 people. And if you don't sort of have a natural continuation, then you're actually doing more harm than you're doing good. If you have an end-to-end ecosystem where you probably start with 2,000 and then drill, you know, come down to like 50, and then you accelerate those 50 and get to 2 or 3 that are very successful, that's more reasonable. And that's where we sort of evolved in these years. So it came organically, it just structured itself, you know. So I think that was somewhat of a positive. And I think it's the same comment for your question. The vision, you know, I know what the vision should not be, but I can tell you what the vision should be because there's a number of options. And I think it needs to be obviously a dialogue in Tunisia. But I think what the Tunisian you know, state have done thus far is essentially perpetuate a model of an economy that was successful in the 30 years that passed, you know, and is not sort of geared enough towards an economy that's more value added, because at the end of the day, Tunisia is 11 million people. You can't compete in textile against Bangladesh and Indonesia, even if you're close to Europe, you know, and your transportation costs are low. Their volumes and their capacity of producing these things cheaper just erase the whole business model. So it's an educated country. It's the 7th largest ratio of scientists in the world. You got to move up in the ladder of value. And what I'm saying, when to define a vision, it has to be, you know, sort of an optimistic vision that doesn't focus immediately on some of what has made Tunisia successful. You know, it needs to be, you know, geared towards innovation. I don't know exactly what it is, but to me, by seeing sort of the startups today that are being successful outside of Tunisia that have been founded by Tunisian people, Tunisian engineers, I'm feeling like the digital economy ought to be, you know, one thing where we need to invest. And I agree with, you know, Karim when he was saying, you know, that it starts with education, you know. What I love about the US educational system is that research and development is embedded in university. The private sector funds universities to do research and development, and that is something that also needs to be part of the vision in order to sort of be at the edge all the time. We talk about the green economy, and we have all these objectives about 2030 and 2040 about how to do sustainable development and renewable energy and all this cool stuff, but then there's practically no sort of real you know, implementation of these things.
Karim said some things earlier which fit to me with what you've just been talking about, Mohammed, and that you talked about the health benefits of Tunisian olive oil. How do we know about the health benefits? It's because you can measure some of the parts of the olive oil and say that it's healthier because it has a greater antioxidant value. So how are you, what are the things, if you're looking ahead for your vision for 10 years from now, what are people going to know about Tunisian olive oil? And what are the implications of that, if any, more broadly beyond what you're trying to do directly for how Tunisia thinks about being a high-value proposition instead of, as you described, just stuff that isn't even branded, that is a commodity?
Yeah, well, just to 50 milligram of extra virgin olive oil, it's equivalent of 200 milligram of ibuprofen. So you've got an olive oil that actually contains an ibuprofen, a natural ibuprofen. And we know every single disease starts with an inflammation. So therefore, when you take your daily allowance of 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, equivalent of 0.25 milligram, you are stabilizing your body. We're not saying you are fixing the problem right away, but we're saying if you don't have an inflammation, you have no disease. And this is how the Italian and how we can, they are the longest living, because they actually, the Italian, they produce about 200,000 tons of extra virgin olive oil, and they consume about 400,000 tons, and they export about 600,000 tons. So they consume the good extra virgin olive oil, so they understand olive oil very well. And this is, and obviously it's actually anti-cancer, and different varieties, it goes into different, it fixes, for example, we have the one I won the world's most healthiest olive oil. It has a very high in polyphenol, so it actually takes off the oxidation of your blood, so and the circulation of your blood, so you will never have a heart attack, you know. And this is not me saying it; it's all there in the science, like documented, and you can actually search for it, and you will find it. And we know today, it's a fact that the most healthiest in oil, it's actually an olive oil, an extra virgin olive oil. And this is why the whole world wants a piece of that at the moment.
If you care about your health and the health of your children and those you love, think Tunisian, all of you. Thank you all very much. Let's all talk now.